Father, thank you for promising to send your Holy Spirit to teach us all things. And this morning we claim that promise. We want you to come and teach us. Give us your wisdom. And so if there's anything standing between you and us, may we be willing to set it aside. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, first couple points are just review here. So number 2, wise people foresee trouble coming and avoid it. Take some action to avoid it. We talked yesterday about there being 3 penalties connected with the mark of the beast. Okay, the first one's fines and imprisonment. Second one, not being able to buy or sell. And the third one, the death decree. Point number 4, death decree happens in connection with the 3rd plague. Okay, you have those quotes in the quote sheet if you need to look at that. Which will be after probation is already closed. So no buy, no sell must be serious enough to be the ultimate test to decide every case. Okay, again, this is all review. So let's talk for just a minute what it would mean not to be able to buy or sell.
No electricity. No gas in your car.
Okay, point A there is no electricity. That means there's no lights. That means the refrigerator doesn't work. Microwave doesn't work. Washer and dryer don't work. AC doesn't work. Neither do any electronics or power tools. Okay, B. Since most water is provided by an electric pump one way or another. If you have a well here, you've got an electric pump down in the well. Even water in other places are run by electric pumps. So that means there's no running water. Okay, turn the faucet on, nothing comes out, no shower or bath, and the toilets don't flush. Point C. There's no fossil fuels. Can't buy gas either. That means your vehicles don't work. The stove and oven doesn't work. Hot water heater doesn't, neither the furnace, and no power equipment like chainsaws and rototillers and so on.
Generators.
And generators. Now just think about what happens now when any one of these goes out. Okay, let's say the refrigerator quits, or the car breaks down, or the washing machine is on the blinks. Okay, any one of these things is, makes a big impact on our lifestyle. It's a major crisis in life. And yet, after we're not able to buy or sell, we're going to have to deal with all of these at the same time. And still evangelize, because probation hasn't closed yet. Matthew 25, 1 through 13, it's a parable of the 10 virgins. I've kind of mentioned this already. The girls had a job to do. Light the way to the wedding. And 5 wise virgins were prepared to do their job even when things didn't go well. The foolish virgins were not prepared for a crisis. And by the time they went back to get prepared, it was too late.
That's a spiritual story, a spiritual application. That's not the primary purpose of that parable, was not a physical illustration.
My point is, let's not overlook the physical lesson that the spiritual is based on. Okay, too often we just look at the spiritual and we forget about the physical that it's based on. This next illustration here, this next quote is illustrates that same point. It's Ministry of Healing, page 469, 470. It is quotation number 49. It says, if we would draw sinners out of the swift running current, our own feet must be set firmly on the rock, Christ Jesus. Now, I don't know how much time you've spent in a creek. Okay. Becky was doing some research on flash flooding not too long ago. And one of the things that came out of that was even in 6 inches of water, if it's flowing swiftly, you're going to have trouble standing up. You know, and a lot of people, 6 inches of water, that's not a big deal. But if it's flowing swiftly, you're going to have trouble standing up. And so if you're going to help somebody else, you better have some solid footing, even in just 6 inches of water.
It'll lift the car off the road.
Right. Yeah, you know, so you get more than 6 inches of water, it gets more severe, you know, by the inch. So, yeah, this is a spiritual lesson here, but again, don't overlook the physical lesson that spiritual lesson's based on. If we're going to be able to help others with their physical needs, that means we have to have our own physical act together. So, what are we supposed to do about all this? Let's turn to Hebrews 11, verse 7. Remember, Jesus said the end times would be like Noah's time. I read that verse yesterday over there in Matthew 24:37. And in Hebrews 11, verse 7, this is the faith chapter. We have an outline of what Noah did that is worth looking at. It says, by what? By faith. Noah being, what? What's the next phrase? Warned of God, or divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear. Okay, don't get hung up on the word fear, but I mean, he took this seriously. That's the main point there. And what did he do? He prepared the ark for the saving of his household. Was talking with somebody on Facebook, or actually I had posted something, and this person responded back and basically was saying, well, the ark represents Jesus, so all I have to do is to be in Jesus. Well, that's true, but the ark was a very physical object that people had to get in order to be saved at that time. And it was a very physical object that Noah had to physically build. And so we do have things that we need to physically do that will reveal our faith, just like it showed Noah's faith.
Amen. And he had to invest everything he had into it.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything.
We'll come to that point in a bit. So just as God told Noah how to prepare, he has also told us how to prepare. So let's look at a couple quotations. First one's Country Living 9 and 10, which is quotation number 38. Quotation number 38 says, again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the city into the country where they can do what? Raise their own provisions. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. And then the rest of the quote talks about what type of a place to get out in the country. So we need to get set up out in the country where we can raise our own provisions. Let's look at quotation number 50. This kind of amplifies that thought a little bit more. This is Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 325. It says the people should learn as far as possible to depend upon what? Products that they can obtain from the soil. And since we're looking at this quote now, let's just think about this a moment. Notice that it says products that they can obtain from the soil. It doesn't say products that can be obtained from the soil. In other words, I'm just going to pick bananas because I think most of you are familiar with bananas. Bananas are good food. They're one of those superfoods. I understand it right. You could just live on bananas and get pretty much good nutrition if that's all you had. Not that you'd want to, but you could. Guess what? Bananas are a product that can be obtained from the soil. But they're not a product that we can obtain from the soil here in Tennessee, right? Because we don't live in the tropics. And so we need to learn to depend on products that we can obtain from the soil wherever we happen to be living. Had an interesting time talking about that with folks down in Florida last week because they can grow bananas. So, also, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself here just a little bit. Sorry about that. No, I'm not. Just going to back up. All right, the next quotation, let's look at this. Quotation number 51, Selected Messages, Book 3, page 427, 428. And notice the timing clues in this quote. It says, the time of trouble was upon us. So this is after the time of trouble started. I saw our people in great distress, weeping and praying, pleading the sure promises of God, while the wicked were all around us, mocking us and threatening to destroy us. Okay, they hadn't actually taken action there yet. They ridiculed our feebleness. They mocked at the smallness of our numbers. They taunted us with words calculated to cut deep. They charged us with taking an independent position from all the rest of the world. They had cut off our resources so that we could not buy or sell. So this is after the no buy, no sell time, but before we final flight to the mountains. Cut off our resources so that we could not buy or sell, and they referred to our abject poverty. I italicized those. I apologize for that. I should have taken the italics off. I had that way for a different purpose, and I just copied the quote in here. But I want us to focus on those two words, abject poverty. Those are not her italics, okay? That's what I need to make clear there. They referred to our abject poverty and stricken condition. They could not see how we could live without the world. We were dependent on the world, and we must concede to the customs, practices, and laws of the world or go out of it. If we were the only people in the world whom the Lord favored, the appearances were awfully against us. Because of all of this, not, like we talked about just a bit ago, what it would mean not to be able to buy or sell, because of all of this, our condition is described as being in abject poverty. So, what happened to that nice home all set up with off-grid and alternate energy comforts and everything that some people are working set up? It doesn't seem to be a part of the picture, okay? I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we need to be careful where our emphasis is. Okay, just saying it doesn't seem to be a part of the picture. And when we get to heaven, what are we going to be saying? Okay, like my friend likes to say, we're sitting around under the mango tree and we're talking about how things were down here in the world before we got there. Or we're going to be saying stuff like, oh, I sure wish I would have gotten that solar system set up so I would be more comfortable during the time of trouble. No, what we're going to be saying is, I wish I had done more and done it sooner so at least one more person could be here, right?
Like we were talking about Noah earlier, as he got further and further into the building of the ark, it came to the point where he had to let even his home go because he needed that money to finish building the ark. because he knew that his future depended on the ark, not on that house.
Right.
So
And that the horse was going to get washed away anyway, so
Yeah.
why hang on to it?
So I believe in our case, even if we have a setup like that, at some point, she says that if we lay our properties on the altar, that God will show us when to sell them.
Yeah.
In the homes that we live in.
Yeah.
And then that money will go into closing up the work, and that's when that comes into play.
Yeah. Need to have everything on the altar anyway.
Yes.
Country home.
Well, we won't be selling our places at this time, though. This is after nobody will sell.
Right.
Before.
Yeah, we would have sold before. Right.
Yes.
But
Otherwise you can't sell.
Ellen White say that the term heaven is cheap enough.
Yes.
So once
Yes.
we get there, we
Yeah.
realize hey,
Exactly.
all this on earth,
Exactly.
the trials we're going through is nothing.
Okay, let's look at the next quote because we're given some counsel how to deal with this privation. This is Manuscript Releases, Volume 19, page 26. It says, privation may be the lot of every soul who now believes and obeys the truth. Okay, that's where we're heading, as we've seen. Christ has told us that we will have reproach. If persecutions for the truth's sake is to come, it is important that, what?
Some skill.
Every line of work become familiar to us. That we and our family may not suffer through lack of knowledge. We can and should have tact and knowledge in trades, in building, in planting, and in sowing. A knowledge of how to cultivate the land will make the rough places much smoother. This knowledge will be counted a great blessing even by our enemies. Okay, so how are we to respond to the coming problem of not being able to buy or sell? So far, what we've looked at. Number one, we're supposed to get places out in the country where we can raise our own provisions. And number two, we need to learn skills. Okay, as Rick was pointing out, we need to learn how to raise them. Okay, there's a learning curve there. You're not going to just, walk out of the city and throw some seeds in the ground and have something to eat. It takes a while for stuff to grow, and so on.
And there's a short growing season sometimes.
Well, yeah, and the whole time of year thing that goes with that too.
That's why I don't understand why people want to move to Montana. The growing season is so short up there.
Well, God needs people in Montana too, right? The message needs to go there. So, you go where God sends you.
Yeah.
I get asked that question regularly, like, where should we go? And it's like, where God sends you.
Florida.
Okay? Yeah, if God sends you to Florida, go to Florida. If God sends you to Montana, go to Montana. If God sends you to Alaska, you better go there. Yeah, just wherever. He's got a place there for you. The best place for you is your place in His plan. But what I'm focusing on here and kind of the next little bit are these skills that we need to learn. Yes, we need to have a location, but we also need to know how to do stuff. And unfortunately, yeah, that's the next point. Modern conveniences and buying everything has caused us not to have two very important things that we need for that. First one, self-sufficiency skills, what the quote's talking about. And number two is having the basic equipment to be able to do that. Remember yesterday we talked about you can't learn how to play violin if you don't have a violin to play. Okay, a lot of these skills, you can't do them unless you have the tools that go with the skill. Imagine trying to garden without any hand tools. At least you would need a shovel, something like that, to spade up the ground a bit and use that to weed and so on. So equipment's important. There is a quote on that. Yeah, I think it's coming up a little later here, so I'll just save it for then. Matthew 10, verse 23. That's the verse where Jesus said, if you're persecuted in one city, flee to another. And right after quoting that, in testimonies, the next quote here, quotation number 54. Okay, Testimonies of the Church, Volume 6, page 478. She quotes that verse there about if you're persecuted in one city, flee to another. And she says if persecution comes there, go to still another place. God will lead his people, making them a blessing in many places. Were it not for persecution, they would not be so widely scattered abroad to proclaim the truth. Now, my testimony is real similar to Rick's. He's been here on this property for, what, like 3 years, you said?
Long 6 years.
6 years, okay. And are you set up now to grow all your own food yet? Not yet. Okay, where we were in Mariposa, California, we had been there about 8 years. And it was our goal to get set up to be able to grow all our own food. Okay? We didn't achieve that goal in the time we were there. Yes, we spent a lot of time doing ministry stuff and so on, but still, okay, it takes time to develop a system, to know what you're doing, and to get it set up. After reading quotes like this, though, I'm thinking we need to come up with a very simple system that we, for persecuted and have to move somewhere, we could move and grow stuff and have enough to eat by the end of that growing season. Okay, it has to be a very simple system in order to make that work. And I think one of our problems is, the seed catalog, man, it's got all these different things. And, I want some of that, I want some of that, I want some of that. And we try to do it all, whereas we would do much better if we focused on just a couple things and did a really good job and grew enough of that and at least had something to eat.
Well, Jim, as well, as we go into the time of trouble, and as we get into the latter end of it, it's going to be harder and harder for us to grow and maintain. And what you shared yesterday, there's an awful lot right here in the forest. And Sister White makes it clear that we're going to be robbed and taken from, and this is before the end, before the great time of trouble. But we are going to have to eat like goats in the end. We need to know what we can do with the pine needle. We need to know with the plantain, purslane, quarter. We're going to have to eat things that these other folks have not been taught, and that's where this comes into play, this whole class, and then some of the things we do in our camps as well. These other folks out here don't know that those weeds are groceries. We will know. So, and during that time, I know we don't like to use the quotes, that's what everybody's familiar with, little time of trouble, there's nothing little about it. But in the latter end of that, we're going to have to eat like goats. Our gardens is not going to do it as well. So we're going to have to forage. Those times it's real hard.
Okay, the blank for number 9 there, we may need to relocate. So we need to think in terms of having a portable system. That figures into some of the stuff we're going to do in the class.
What do you mean by system?
What did you say?
Just
Relocate.
having the things that we need in a way that they can be portable. Okay, similar to the way Abraham. Okay, they lived in tents and they could pack up and move their whole homestead.
Like in Illinois' day, they would have had a wagon. They put everything they needed on that wagon.
Right. Okay, so let's do a little bit of analyzing. Number 10, we put this on the board yesterday. What are the survival priorities?
Shelter.
Number 1, shelter. This is the first column there. Shelter. What's next? Water. Next one? Health concerns. And number 4? Fire. And number 5? Food. Okay, so then the expanded list of actual equipment item categories to fulfill those needs. There's 3 different types of shelter. What's the first one?
Clothing and footwear.
Clothing and footwear. The second one? Bedding. Third one? Structural shelter. Okay, across from water, what do we need?
Water bottle.
Water bottle. Now in a homestead situation, that might take on the form of a water barrel rather than just a bottle. Right? But it's doing the same thing, just the barrel can hold more. Okay, for example, during the early 1980s, we spent some time up with Jerry Franklin at his place up in Canada. Some of you know about him. He died about a year ago, unfortunately. The cabin we had there didn't have any electricity or running water, and so we had to pack it up from the well just down the hill. And so we brought water up in 5-gallon buckets, a couple 5-gallon buckets on a yoke. Really wanted to make another yoke here. But, and then put the water in the barrel. And so on Friday afternoon, that meant like 7 trips up from the well that I had to do to fill the barrel and then fill the buckets too, so I'd have enough water so I wouldn't have to go get water on Sabbath. But we had a 55-gallon drum there right in the kitchen with a lid on it that we could lift up. And so whenever we needed some water, there wasn't any faucet to turn on, right? So we just had a dipper and we just dip into the barrel and get some water that way. Okay, across from health concerns, hygiene items, yes. And across from fire starter and fuel. And across from food is food, and the line below that is cook pot and utensils. And then the 4 categories of tools. First one is cutting and choppings. The second one is digging tools. Third one is cordage and fasteners. Fourth one is containers. Now, flipping over the page here, we have all of these things in our homes. Okay, our homes are our survival system. Lisa, you had your hand up.
You know, there's a lot of controversy on foraging for mushrooms. Some people say that they're a fungus and they shouldn't even be eaten. Other people say, yeah, it's just part of. What do you think?
Be real careful with mushrooms. Okay, I'm not opposed to eating them, but we've heard some stories of people who knew better and still got into trouble. So just be really careful with mushrooms. Yeah, I'm not sure that fixes it in each case.
Right.
Okay, point number 11. We have all of these items on this expanded list in our homes. Okay, well, you might think, well, I don't have any digging tools in my home. Well, but somebody used some kind of excavation equipment to level out the pad and dig the trenching for the pipes and wiring and stuff, right? So you still have that in connection with your home. Well, I don't have any cutting or chopping tools in my home. Well, I got cutting tools in the kitchen, knives, but I don't have any chopping tools. Remember, we talked about chopping tools being saws and stuff like that for more serious wood shaping. Or did we yet? Maybe not. Anyway, we will. Think, well, I don't have any of that, but somebody had to use some kind of, saws to cut down the trees and mill up the lumber to build your house with. Okay, so again, all of these things are with our homes. But without electricity or gas, a lot of stuff isn't going to work. And so after we're not able to buy or sell anymore, we will essentially be going back to an 18th century lifestyle, where burning wood and muscle power will take the place of many of the things we use electricity and fossil fuels for now.
Like the Mennonites and the Amish.
Yeah, we can learn a lot from them.
And muscle power.
What century?
Okay, number 12.
1700.
Oh, yeah.
House on the hill.
Yeah.
Number 12, to live this type of lifestyle, we will need, number 1, houses that are set up to cook indoors with wood and to heat with wood. Okay, I have to share an experience. oh, I guess this was like 4 years ago or something. There was going to be this really bad ice storm in the east and kind of northeast. I don't know if it got down this far or not, but there was a really bad ice storm they were predicting, and they saw it coming. The meteorologists saw it coming a couple days out. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff came up on Facebook, and I remember reading this one thing that somebody put together. It was like 10 or 12 different ways you could cook when the power goes out. And so I had a whole bunch of different suggestions, but unfortunately, like next to each one, it said for outdoor use only, outdoor use only. And I'm like, yeah, but there's this ice storm coming. Who's going to go outside to cook in an ice storm? And so we need to be set up so that we can cook indoors with wood. Okay, back in the 18th century, everybody did that. It's just the homes aren't set up for that now, or very few are.
What about this clay kind of, it's a cooking?
Yeah, there's several different ways to do it, but you need to have a place, that you can put the wood in and burn, and then it has to be vented to outside. Okay, if you don't vent it to outside, you're going to smoke yourself out.
What time are you talking about for number 12? What time period are we referring to here?
Referring to this time period here, after we're not able to buy or sell, before we finally flee.
So in other words, we need to have it set up like this before.
Before, right.
What if persecution causes somebody to move? How are they going to do that?
Then our portable system needs to include that. I'm going to demonstrate that during the class. Well, actually before then. Number 2, we'll need an independent source of water and a way to bring the water into our house. Kind of talked about that a minute ago, packing it up from buckets. Number 3, we'll need hygiene and sanitation systems that don't need electricity or gas to function. And flush toilets are probably at the top of that list, okay? Once the power goes out, they don't work anymore. So we need some other way to take care of those needs, because we will have them, right? You can't just stop going to the bathroom because they can't buy or sell anymore. Point number 13. We talked about raising our own provisions. That's what this one is focusing on. To produce everything we eat. We typically think of gardens, but we need to expand our thinking on that a bit. Besides gardens, we also need to think about grapes and berries. Okay, they call them small fruits sometimes. And then fruit and nut trees. You could put orchards in there if you wanted to, I guess, but trees. And growing our own grains. This is a big one that a lot of people don't even think about. Okay, most of the bulk of what we eat, if you analyze it, it's coming from grains. At least for most people. And we talk about growing our own food, and we just tend to focus on the garden, and not too many people are doing stuff with grains. So this is something we need to really do a lot more research and experimenting with.
We'll have potatoes, and more potatoes.
Maybe.
So what about like in this portable type system, like microgreens and sprouting and stuff like that? That's real easy to, it doesn't take
As long as you have the seeds and are able to get more seed.
Filipino family that love rice and not really kind about potatoes, so he's been trying to go rice, but we're really dry out there. So it's harder to grow rice.
Upland rice is from Central America. It's a dryland rice. Yields up to 600%. Yeah, it's the heaviest yielding grain that you can grow.
Okay, point A, to have food year-round. Okay, we're used to just going to the store and there it is. But if we're limited to what we can grow in our garden or grain field or wherever, okay, here comes this crop. You're not going to have any more until next year's crop. You want to eat in that in-between time. And there,
Number A.
pardon?
Can you repeat 13A?
That's what I'm doing right now. To have food year-round, we will need the equipment and the know-how to cultivate, harvest, process, and preserve these foods without electricity or gas. Yesterday, Becky and I took a walk down over to the other campground. Is that a root cellar you're putting in? Really want to encourage you folks to be thinking about root cellars. Okay, you can store a lot of good food in a root cellar. It doesn't cost anything. There are other simpler ways, like we're talking about being portable, simpler ways where you can make something that's not quite as expansive, and still store food in the ground like that. There's also a lot of crops that you can just leave them in the garden and go and pick them when you need them. I think carrots are that way a bit, and some of the other, yeah, it depends on how cold it is. If the ground's too frozen to pull it out, that might not work. But people cover it up with a thick layer of straw or something like that so they can still go do that. Anyway, you need to learn what works in your area.
You said sand or hay works too, cover it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can build berms as well. You can lay down a layer of hay. You've seen this, you mound your potatoes,
Yeah.
crops, and then you build you some little wooden boxes, doors that you can open and reach in, and then you pack them. You lay another layer of hay, and then you pack them over with clay, and you can store it just like a root cellar.
Using bales of hay.
Well, you layer up the hay for insulation.
Okay, point number 14. We would be wise to get the necessary equipment before we're not able to buy or sell. But what about last-minute converts who haven't had a chance to prepare?
Take them in.
Or what if, yeah, we take them in, or what if we lose something or it gets stolen or broken? And so we need to look at our list of essential equipment here again.
What would you say to people, I run into lots of them out there, and they say, I'm single, I'm disabled, I'm poor, I'm this, I'm that.
Do what you can. God doesn't bless inactivity. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, I used to have us actually go through this, but it gets really tedious. And so I really want to encourage you to do this on your own. We're just going to do it with clothing. Okay, if we don't have clothing, how can we obtain clothing from the soil? Products that we can obtain from the soil.
Cotton.
What?
Cotton.
Okay, so we grow some cotton. What type of skills does that take?
Farming.
Agricultural skills. Okay, and equipment. So we grow some cotton. Okay, what do we have to do before we can weave it?
Clean it.
Have to spin it.
Spin it.
Okay, and so there's equipment and skills you need for that. And then you take all those threads and you weave them together. And now you have some cloth that you can sew. Okay, all of these skills, we call them fiber arts. And so to make clothing from cotton, you need agricultural skills to grow the cotton, and then the fiber arts to turn that cotton into cloth, into clothing. Okay, did you see all the steps along the way? Okay, again, we're not going to take the time to do it. But please pick each one of these and go through that process. Okay, there's just a lot of stuff. And what I've done here is just like pick the basic skill sets that are necessary for these things. And as I was doing this, I noticed that there's 4 of them that keep popping up over and over again. What are they?
Fiber arts.
Fiber arts. What else? Agricultural skills. What else?
Woodworking.
Woodworking
Metalworking.
and metalworking. Okay, woodworking, I think we understand that. Metalworking, you're primarily making tools there so that you can do the other things. or in many cases. Now, I have to confess, my parents got a hold of Country Living Message when I was young. My dad was raised out in the country. My mom was a missionary child, pretty much city girl. Okay, but they got a hold of the Country Living Message, and we were working towards it for several years. I don't remember exactly because I was a kid during that time, but when I was 13, we moved out to the country. I've been out in the country pretty much ever since. And because of my parents and other influences on me, beginning in my early adulthood, I started on a quest to learn how to do all this stuff. Okay? There are many of these things I know how to do. I don't have the skill to do it because I've never had the time to develop that skill. Okay, but I at least kind of have an idea of how it's done. And what I have to say here, I'm going to turn 70 a little later this summer. I mean 71, excuse me, turned 70 last summer. I'm not going to say any more about that. Anyway, I've been trying to, like for the last 50 years or more, been trying to learn how to do all this stuff. And what I have to say is no one person can do it all. Okay? Don't knock yourself out trying to do that, especially if you're coming along a little late in the game here. And I don't think we have another 50 years, definitely. But no one person can do it all. And so don't knock yourself out trying to, but do at least develop something, okay? So what I'm saying here is let's pick one of these that you're interested in, especially one of those four main ones, and especially agriculture. I mean, everybody should be doing something with agriculture anyway. But as far as the other crafts, pick one of those or one of the other ones that are listed on here and develop that. That figures right into the next quote that we're going to look at. This is quotation number 55. Loma Linda Messages, page 477. Notice what this one says here. The time will come when God's people will have to move away from the cities and do what? Live in small companies by themselves. So they're moving away from the cities. Where are we going? To the country where we can raise our own provisions. But what are our living conditions? It says we're going to be in small companies. Okay, we're going to be in groups. I think there's several reasons for that. Okay, all of this is character building, preparation for heaven. Right? And the basis for all of it is God is love. Love is something you can't do by yourself. Love is something you can't develop by yourself. We might be tempted to think, well, if there wasn't anybody out there to hassle me, I could be a very loving person. It doesn't work that way. Okay, you develop love by being in contact with others. And so it makes sense that God would put us in groups. Okay, the whole church family, spiritual gifts figure heavily into this too. Please study that more. But we're going to be in groups. And so within this group, hopefully there'll be somebody that knows how to do all of this stuff. No one person can do it all. But in a group, collectively with the group, all the bases can get covered. And so God has given you certain interests and talents and abilities. Develop the things that go with that. And trust that God will hook you up with the group, and somebody in the group will know how to do the other stuff. But you can go ahead and be the one that knows how to do, the skill set that you've developed. Being in a group brings up a very important question. And we're going to spend the rest of this study talking about that in one form or another. A lot of us might be tempted to think, oh, God's going to put me in a group. I'm so glad. Somebody in the group will know what to do and I'll be taken care of. But that isn't really what God has in mind. Okay, He wants us to bear fruit. He wants each of us to bear some kind of fruit, to be fruitful. And so I'm going to just word it this way. Are we going to, in that group that God hooks us up with, are we going to be a liability to that group, or are we going to be an asset to that group? Okay, are we going to be a blessing to that group, or are we going to be a burden to that group? What does God want us to be?
An asset.
He wants us to be an asset or a blessing to that group. And so work with Him to accomplish that in you. So what would make us an asset to the group that God brings us with? We're talking about this time after we're not able to buy or sell, living in the country, okay?
Having skills.
Okay, having skills and what else?
Knowledge.
Knowledge and one other thing.
Equipment.
Key equipment items. Okay, let's say you're the person that shows up to this with a crosscut saw. Well, now we can cut lumber or cut firewood. Nobody else had that. That'd be an important piece of equipment. Okay, many other things would fit that same category. Did I say hand? Yes.
Like also what you're saying is, if I've been used to growing garlic, sweet potatoes, and whatever, you know,
Yeah.
things that I was really good at, and I came with my seeds and everything, and somebody else knew how to grow this, this, and this, then it's not up to any one person to know how to grow every item.
Right.
And be experienced.
Right. You know, do as much as you can, but just understand that you're probably not going to be able to do it all. I mean, I've tried.
Remember too, during that time, we're still going to be evangelizing. So as we evangelize and we're bringing people back with us from the cities that have new converts, that they will probably need to be taken care of. They may need clothes that need altered or shared, or they may need all kinds of stuff because they haven't been able to bring anything with them.
They're going to have to, many of us, I think beginning even now, there's that one quote about people having to learn quickly what it's taken some of us years and years to learn. I'm seeing that starting to be fulfilled already. And that's definitely going to get more and more as we get closer to the end. Okay, 17b. But more than anything else, what will make us an asset? Actually, there's kind of two things there, but I want to focus on one of them.
Connection to God.
Shelter.
Or connection to God.
Well, yeah, connection with God. I mean, if without that, none of this matters. Okay? The other one that goes with that is your attitude. Okay, and your willingness to work. But as far as talking about equipment items, what's going to make you more of an asset than anything else is having, what's priority number one? Shelter. Okay? Now, Rick's here. I'm just going to pick on him because he's got the place, and I know he's thought about this. You know, say 5 families show up here. Where's he going to put them?
Camp spots.
Well, he's got campsites, right? But they need to have their own shelter. Okay, if you try to stick them all in the house, they may not all fit. And so having your own warm, dry shelter is going to make you more of an asset than anything else. Because Rick won't have to worry about where to put you up. Okay, or wherever else you end up, right? Same thing. I want you to just be thinking in that direction. We'll talk more about that before we're done here. Okay, got to look at one other quotation before we finish. Actually, 2 of them. Quotation number 56. This is Counsels in Health, page 375. This says, many will be laid away to sleep before the fiery ordeal. The time of trouble shall come upon our world. Okay, a lot of people are looking at that quote and say, I'm probably going to die before it all happens, so. And maybe. However, let me just expound on that idea just a little bit. Y'all heard of Methuselah? Yes. Who was his dad? Enoch. Okay? Enoch was a prophet. Enoch, the guy that got translated. Okay, he was also a prophet. Called that in the book of Jude, I believe. Do you know what Methuselah's name means?
When he dies.
When he dies.
Okay, so Methuselah's name was a prophecy. And roughly translated, his name means when he dies, it will come. And if you go through the begats there and do the math, Methuselah died the year of the flood. Okay, the same year the flood came, Methuselah died earlier in the year. And so think about it. If anybody had a home free card, Methuselah did. Okay? The prophet had said, you're going to die before it happens. And he's like, sure glad I don't have to deal with all of this crazy ark building stuff. Is that what he did? No. Let's look at the next quote. This is Times of the Times, February 20, 1879. It says, Enoch instructed his family in regard to the flood. Methuselah, the son of Enoch, listened to the preaching of his grandson Noah, who faithfully warned the inhabitants of the world that a flood of waters was coming upon the earth. Methuselah and his sons and his grandsons lived in the time of the building of the ark. They, with some others, received instructions from Noah. And the last phrase is what? Assisted in him in his work. So instead of Methuselah saying, glad I don't have to deal with all this, too bad for you all, he helped build the ark. And he knew he wouldn't have to worry about it. Why?
Because our life needs to be a life of service.
A life of service, yeah. He wanted to bear fruit. He wanted to be a part of what God's people were doing at that time. Okay, kind of it's the way what I think of in connection with that is the Millerite movement. Okay, it was obvious that God was working with that group of people. And yet they were saying on October 22, 1844, Jesus is coming. And one of the main things that was thrown at them was, hey, you're not supposed to know the day or the hour. Now, they had an explanation for that, but still, you know, you could have taken that position. You don't know the day or the hour. But did you know that there was people who, you know, didn't really understand all of that, but they knew that God was working with these people and they wanted to be a part of whatever God was doing on earth at the time. And so they joined the Millerite movement anyway. Okay, building the ark was what God's people were doing at that point in time. And Methuselah wanted to be a part of it, even though he knew he didn't have to deal with it. And so if you feel that you're going to be a Methuselah, be a Methuselah. Do what Methuselah did. Okay, help the other people that you know will have to go through it. We need to work together on all of this. I want to close by reading you a story. And yes, I wrote the story.
Do we have it in our pack?
I don't think it's in your packets. This is available on the website, or if you gave me your email address, I will send it to you. This is called, what?
We have it, access or...
Asset or Liability, a Story of Two Families. And this is kind of a standalone piece here, so I'm backing up just a little bit for us because we've studied some of these things here, but we'll get into it really soon.
What's your website again, sir?
Pardon?
What's the website again?
My website, www.preparingtostand.org. Okay, even if you haven't been able to get a place in the country yet, start developing skills. Collecting key equipment items and learning how to do things without electricity and fossil fuels. It might be helpful to think, are we going to be an asset or a liability to the group God connects us with? To illustrate this concept, let's contrast two different families who are still living in the same large city at the time of the first national Sunday law in the USA. Remember, this law marks the beginning of the time of trouble, and it's our signal to flee the large cities. This will probably happen before we're not able to buy ourselves, so we will picture both families still being able to buy gas to flee from the cities in their vehicles. For the purpose of our illustration, both of these families also know a third family that already lives in the country. This third family has generously invited both of these families to come to their place if they don't have anywhere else to go when it's time to flee. They have also extended this same invitation to several other believers as well. Like Lot and his family, the first family in our illustration hasn't prepared. When they reluctantly realized that it's time to flee, now, they just grabbed a few of their personal items, got in their car, and drove off. When they showed up at the third family's property, a place had to be found for them to stay. Since there were several others who had already accepted the third family's invitation, the first family ended up living in a corner of the already overcrowded small farmhouse living room. By that time, it was late in the day, so everyone worked to scrounge up some bedding for them to sleep with. In the morning, everyone had a hearty breakfast, but the wife of the third family was overheard saying, "With this group, the food we have here won't last long." After breakfast, there was a group meeting during which chores for the day were assigned. But the first family in our illustration had to be shown how to use the tools in the garden and orchard, how to safely cut firewood, and because they had frequently eaten out, they even had to learn how to prepare food from scratch. So everything actually took longer to get done. Often they were tempted to complain about the substandard living conditions, the dirt and the bugs. Because they were not used to physical labor, it was definitely a challenge for them just to do their part of the workload. Their inclination towards laziness, together with their somewhat negative attitude, tried the patience of the rest of the group. However, as loving brothers and sisters in Jesus, they were willing to work with them and help them grow. Their lack of preparation in all these areas definitely put additional strain on the already limited resources, as well as on the social and spiritual structure of the group. Because they had to be provided with even the basic necessities, because of their lack of practical skills, and because of their attitudes towards work and discomfort, they would have been a liability. On the other hand, like Noah and his family, the second family in our illustration did prepare. Although they had not been able to purchase country property of their own, they still did what they could. As they thought and prayed about their situation, they realized that when they had to flee, they would probably be going to someone else's place in the country. And they determined that when they got there, they would be an asset rather than a liability. They lived in a second-story apartment, so they didn't have any yard, but they still wanted to get some experience raising their own provisions. So after thinking and praying about it, they started growing some simple vegetables in a couple of pots on their small balcony deck. Soon the deck was crowded with as many containers as they could fit on it. They even had a dwarf fruit tree. Realizing that shelter is number one priority, they concluded that if they were going to truly be an asset, they would somehow have to provide their own shelter. If not, they would have to depend on someone else for something to live in. Bringing their own shelter to stay in would contribute more towards being an asset than anything else. So they prayed and did some research on various shelter options. The first thing they thought of was to get an RV. Electricity for the electrical components could be provided by a simple solar panel setup. However, for heating and cooking, RVs are dependent on propane, which must be purchased. So after they were no longer able to buy or sell, they wouldn't have any heat, neither would they be able to cook indoors. Possibly they could install a wood-burning stove, but the floor plans of most RVs simply don't allow for that. Besides, realistically, the small vehicle they already had would not be able to tow a travel trailer, and they could not afford a larger tow vehicle or motorhome, so they ruled out getting an RV. After doing more research, they discovered that there are people living year-round, even in northern Canada and Alaska, in canvas wall tents. These tents come with a stove jack, which allows a wood stove to be set up inside them. Before about the 1930s, these type of tents were common, and there are several references to this type of tent in Ellen White's writings. They were regularly used in the early mining and lumber camps, where people needed a warm, dry place to stay, starting with their first night in a remote area. In time, many of the miners and lumbermen would make a wooden platform with a knee wall to set their tent up on. Then by adding roofing and siding, etc., step by step, as they were able, these tents could be turned into a cabin. Compared to modern tents made of synthetic materials, these tents were much more durable and warmer. and more easily transported than an RV. So the family decided to purchase a canvas wall tent with a stove jack and a small wood-burning tent stove to go with it. To practice living the no-buy, no-sell lifestyle, they regularly went camping. On these trips, they spent time in nature, practiced cooking on a wood fire, and became familiar with how to make life without electricity or gas work. From the experience they gained while camping, they realized the need for other key equipment items, such as rugged clothing, good bedding, containers for water, a large wash basin, a folding table, a small axe, a bow saw, and a shovel. They soon realized that there wouldn't be room for themselves and all this gear in their smallish vehicle. When they actually had to flee, they would want to take even more than what they took when they went camping, so they thought and prayed about what they should do. A few days later, they noticed a motorcycle pulling a small trailer and realized that even with their small car, there were small, inexpensive utility trailers that they could tow even with their vehicle. So they worked towards having a trailer hitch installed on their car and bought one of these trailers. As they recognized the nearness of time to flee, they began in earnest to collect some of the other equipment items that they didn't already have. A hand-crank grain grinder, a wash tub, a wheelbarrow, a crosscut saw. Because storage space was limited in their apartment, they made an organized pile of gear in one corner of their living room. These things, along with their personal items, were kept ready to go so that they could quickly load up their car and trailer, head out of town when the time came to leave. By this time, they had already made several visits to the third family's property. While there, they would help with whatever needed to be done on the homestead and share spiritually with the third family. On one of these visits, as they talked with the third family, it was decided that they should pick out a spot for their camp. So, together with the third family, they picked out a spot, trimmed the trees and bushes in the area, leveled out a pad for their tent, and cut and stacked some firewood. When the time came to flee, they loaded up their car and trailer and drove out of the city. Once they showed up at the third family's property, they simply checked in with them, then drove over to their spot. As they put up their tent, set up the wood stove, brought in the folding table, unfolded their cots, and rolled out their sleeping mats, spread out their sleeping bags, brought in the boxes of food and utensils and duffels with their clothing, everyone in the family helped, even the children. They all knew just what to do or just where everything needed to go. Although their tent wasn't large, they had a warm, dry place to live. They had their own adequate clothing and bedding. In many ways, they were better off than those at the house. At least they had their own privacy as a family. Since they had brought their own equipment, they were able to haul their own water, bathe themselves, wash their own clothes, cut their own firewood, cook their own food. They were also able to pitch right in with the work that needed to be done in the garden, orchard, and grain field. The wheelbarrow they brought was a great blessing to everyone, hauling produce from the garden, biomass to the compost pile, and firewood to and from the wood piles. As they saw the crowded conditions at the house, they shared much of their stores of food they had brought with them. They had learned to sew as a part of their preparations and bought a hand-crank sewing machine. So when they noticed that there was quite a bit of clothing being shared among the group, they were able to alter some of the clothing so it would fit the person who was wearing it better. They had also learned a bit about construction and brought some basic construction tools. So when one of the other people in the group was able to get some lumber, they were able to help build a couple small cabins to relieve the overcrowding at the house and make a wood floor for their own tent. Because they were missionary-minded, they helped to organize the group's evangelistic team that would go to visit and share the end-time gospel message with the neighbors, the nearby country community, and even the city they had left behind. They had also studied medical missionary work, so whenever someone in the group or one of the neighbors or someone the evangelistic team contacted became sick or injured, they were able to help. During their earlier study of the prophecies, they had recognized the need to be able to endure to the end and began looking at the end time scene as a whole. In doing so, they realized that in addition to fleeing from the cities to the country at the first National Sunday Law, they also need to prepare to flee to the most desolate and solitary places in response to the death decree shortly after the 7 last plagues began to be poured out. As a result, they had started learning about wilderness survival. From that time on, they would learn and practice bushcraft skills in the evenings and on their camping trips. As a family, they'd even gone on a couple survival trips, taking only minimal basic gear for practice. This knowledge and experience enabled them to teach the rest of the group about wild edible plants and other wilderness skills in preparation for when they would all have to leave the country property and flee to the wilderness. Due to their own research and previous visits at the third family's homestead, they knew life in the country would be a lot of hard work. Because of their diligent study and belief in the end-time prophecies, they were also diligent about their preparations. They collected necessary equipment. They practiced as much as they could by growing their container garden, going camping, and learning skills in the evenings. The time and effort they put into these activities, together with their Christian attitudes in general, helped to develop in them a willingness to work. And the group never heard any of them complain, even the children. This second family had prepared as much as they were able. They were set up not only to be able to take care of themselves, but also to be a blessing to others. From their other-centered focus in life and their seriousness about preparing for the things we have been divinely warned about, it was obvious that Jesus was living in their hearts. Their faith was made evident by their works. This second family was definitely an asset. Everyone in the group was glad they were there.
Wow.
Let's go ahead and close with prayer. Stick around, make an announcement about the class. Father, thank you for warning us what's coming and telling us what to do to prepare for it. Just like you told Noah to prepare for the coming flood by building an ark. May we allow our faith to be made perfect by our works. May we be faithful in preparing so that we can be an asset rather than a liability to the group that you hook us up with. Be with us now today as we continue to talk about these things more. Continue to send your Holy Spirit to teach us and give us your wisdom. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.